The moment appeared straightforward to the majority of viewers of the Olympic final in Milan. A young American skater floating across the ice, an apparently effortless routine, and a scoreboard that would soon affirm history. Something the US had been waiting more than 20 years to witness. However, such moments seldom start where we believe they do. Rewinding Alysa Liu's story far enough leads to a much quieter place in the end. Just a teen sitting by herself with a phone in her hands, not in front of cameras or in an Olympic arena. February of 2022 was the month. The Olympics in Beijing had just concluded. At that point in their careers, the majority of athletes are already thinking about their next tournament season and medal. Elite sports have a rhythm like that. Seldom does it slow down. However, Alysa Liu accomplished something that nearly everyone was unprepared for. She launched Instagram, wrote a little remark, and shared it. At 16, she was retiring. Just a few phrases on the internet, no federation release, no news conference, and no lengthy explanation. The skating community began responding in a matter of minutes. Coaches were taken aback. Fans were perplexed. Because prodigies are not supposed to leave, especially in such a manner, journalists started contacting experts in the sport to attempt to comprehend what had just transpired. However, if you pay close attention to Alysa's later account of that incident, you'll notice an intriguing subtext. Medals were not mentioned by her. She made no mention of competition pressure. She discussed control, which is considerably more subdued. In subsequent interviews, she stated that the sport had begun to feel like everyone else's. Timetables, standards, and choices. These things might gradually cease to feel like options when you are raised in a system like elite figure skating. And that insight usually comes to you abruptly, often all at once. This could account for the message's appearance online rather than its announcement in a conference room, because conversations can become risky if you have already made the decision to leave. People attempt to convince you. They serve as a reminder of the possibilities. They serve as a reminder of all of your prior investments. Alysa thereby completely avoided such situation. The decision was already public after she hit the post button. This particular element, however, makes that moment more nuanced than it first seems. People typically search for someone to blame when prodigy stories fall apart. A federation, a coach, or occasionally even the athlete. However, in Alysa Liu's instance, a different name kept popping up in the background of the discussion. According to several interviews, her father, Arthur Liu, had spent years creating the framework for her skating career. Coaches, training, international competitions, everything needed to transform a talented youngster into a genuine contender. This raises an issue that those involved in the sport started posing at that time, a query that never made the news. When things began to fall apart, where was he? Because Alysa Liu remarked something that seemed almost casual, almost like an observation, when she later discussed the most challenging time in her career. He wasn't actually present, and because everyone rejoiced before Milan, before the medals, before the comeback, just one statement alters the way the entire story starts. One of the world's most gifted teenage skaters once turned his back on everything, and no one seemed to be able to stop it for a time. The announcement seemed abrupt to those who were not involved in the sport. Alysa Liu was once considered the future of figure skating in the United States. She vanished the following day. However, the response was more subdued and cautious at American skating rinks, because individuals who spend years in high-level training settings pick up on specific cues. Seldom does burnout happen overnight. One early morning exercise at a time, it gradually grows. The majority of prodigies start their rigorous training at the age of 6, 7, or 8, long before they really comprehend the significance of the Olympic Games. Alysa Liu's life was already substantially different from other teenagers by the time she began performing quadruple leaps at the age of 13. Weekend travel, conditioning after school, morning ice workouts before school, and competitive schedules spanning continents and nations. It may appear glitzy from the outside. From the inside, it's just normal. Additionally, routines have a way of concealing things. When you speak with past skaters, they frequently express the same weird sensation. Everything seems regular while you're inside that system. The rigid timetables seem typical. It feels like regular pressure. Even fatigue begins to feel normal. The perception doesn't start to change until an athlete moves away. In a number of post-retirement interviews, Alysa Liu alluded to this. She never mentioned a single pivotal occasion that brought everything to an abrupt end. Rather, she discussed something more gradual. The excitement of the sport was faded. Now, if you've ever kept a close eye on Olympic sports, you are undoubtedly aware that many competitors experience that moment. Although it's a well-known tale behind the scenes, it's rarely discussed in public when careers are still alive. The habit eventually weighs more than the first love. Athletes then have to make a silent choice, either move aside or push through it. Alysa made that choice when she was 16. The way she handled it is what makes the narrative unique. Before making such a significant change, the majority of athletes at that age were required permission from a coach, a federation, or family members. Alysa didn't inquire, though. She made the announcement, and it conveys a lot about the emotional climate of that particular moment, because such a hasty decision typically indicates that something else has been developing underneath the surface, something that is not shown in medal tables or competition results. People involved in the sport also observed something else during that time. There was a conspicuous lack of explanation, either controversy or dramatic interviews, leaving observers to attempt to fill in the blanks on their own. Additionally, rumors inevitably arise when a prodigy abruptly leaves the sport. Was it stress, harm, or conflict inside the family? Alysa would go on to say that the truth was probably more nuanced than anyone answered. However, whenever her early career was brought up, one aspect of the tale kept coming up: her dad. Throughout her ascent through American figure skating, Alysa Liu was a constant presence. His dedication to helping her career was frequently acknowledged by friends, coaches, and journalists. The constant logistics, travel, and training needed to compete at that level. However, there are numerous ways to define devotion in professional sports: support, investment, and expectation. Sometimes all three at once. And when the athlete in question is still a teenager, that combination can produce a dynamic that is challenging to comprehend from the outside. This leads us back to something that Alysa would say when thinking back on that time in her life years later, almost casually. She claimed that her father wasn't truly present for her when things were beginning to fall apart. Not absent from the sport, but absent in a distinct manner. When she originally brought up that detail, it was largely ignored emotionally. However, after hearing it, the narrative of her retirement starts to take a completely different turn because the question abruptly shifts. Why a genius left is no longer the only question. It develops into something more profound. When a dream begins to fall apart, what happens if the person who helped create it isn't there? And in the instance of Alysa Liu, that absence would suddenly influence everything that followed. Alysa Liu nearly vanished from the world that had shaped her early years throughout the course of the following 2 years. There are no rankings, no training camps, no competitions, just quiet. That kind of quiet can be unsettling in professional sports. Typically, careers advance swiftly. The seasons alternate with one another. New names emerge virtually instantly when athletes peak, decline, and retire. However, Alysa deviated entirely from that rhythm. She went to college and hung out with pals who had never experienced the rigors of competitive skating. Her days were not planned around ice for the first time since she was a young child, and things change with that type of distance. A person rarely has the room to criticize a highly controlled setting after spending years there. The schedule is just there. Get up, work out, compete, and repeat. However, memories start to quietly rearrange themselves once that freedom is gone. Some moments are more distinct than others. Little decisions, discussions, and other things that were once commonplace start to feel strange. In multiple interviews following her return, Alysa alluded to this change. When she talked about her early career, she didn't sound resentful. If anything, she sounded introspective and perhaps inquisitive about the life she had lived prior to leaving. She once talked about how weird it was to have free time all of a sudden. While free time may seem little, it can initially feel foreign to someone who spent the majority of their youth in a competitive environment. Ordinary life without early morning training, coaches observing every move with the assumption that each day must lead to the next competition. And during that time, something intriguing started to occur. It wasn't because anyone forced her back toward the ice. It wasn't because the Federation asked. And it wasn't because the media anticipated. But the beliefs that had previously seemed like pressure gradually began to return. Alysa claims that the idea occurred to her silently. She resumed skating for her own enjoyment. At first, it wasn't really training. Rather, it was more like going back to a place she used to love, feeling the ice beneath her skates once again, and recalling the speed, glide, and sensation that initially made her fall in love with the sport. People who have moved away from difficult situations frequently talk about this kind of moment when the weight that made the situation intolerable is lifted by distance. Abruptly, the initial happiness starts to resurface. However, something was different this time. Alysa had changed from being a teenage skating prodigy whose entire existence revolved around the sport. So she was older, more self-reliant, and much more conscious of the boundaries she desired for her career. Everything would need to alter if she went back, including the way her life was structured, the choices she made about training, and even the emotional dynamics around the sport. Each of those would need to have a unique appearance. She didn't make a big public announcement when she finally decided to return. In fact, until competition resumed, many figure skaters were unaware of how significant her comeback was. Additionally, something about her skating changed when she returned to the competitive stage. It was almost quickly observed by commentators. She appeared more at ease, less nervous, and more in the moment. Although it's challenging to quantify that kind of shift in scores or numbers, the difference is evident when you examine the film from those competitions. She wasn't skating in an attempt to fit in. She was skating as if she had already made up her mind that everything would be alright. And everything may be altered by that way of thinking, because the pressure to stay lessens when an athlete understands that leaving is a possibility. For this reason, those involved in the sport noticed something out of the ordinary when Alysa Liu arrived for the 2026 Olympic Games in Milan. She didn't appear to be burdened by expectations. She appeared to have already made the most difficult choice of her life. However, one more interaction
discussion that would uncover something surprising about the individual who had been present from the start, her dad. Additionally, things didn't go as most people would have predicted when she told him she was returning. Alysa Liu had to have one talk, and she determined she was ready to participate once more. Not with her father, not with sponsors, not with the Federation. From the start, Arthur Liu had been part of her skating life. Coaches frequently discussed his involvement in her early years. He oversaw logistics, planned trips, and ensured she had access to the latest training facilities, and contributed to the development of a framework that enabled her skill to flourish in numerous ways. It was inevitable that he would learn of Alysa's covert preparations for a comeback to competition. When he did, her response was precisely what most parents would experience. He felt content and eager and thrilled. It undoubtedly occurred to him that the narrative was self-correcting. The prodigy of her love was returning. Returning to the ice was the talent that everyone had faith in. Alysa, however, had a quite different experience at that moment. When she discussed it in an interview years later, she described a feeling that many people found surprising. She claimed that she was nearly accepted as content, not because she didn't care about him, or because she intended to harm him, but rather because his response brought up memories of an unresolved issue. Her decision to put his at the age of 16 had been quite personal. It has to do with tiredness and taking back control of her life. People in her immediate vicinity had responded to her after telling her her worries. Disappointment, opposition, and attempts to persuade her to stay. Years later, she eventually made the decision to go back, but she wanted to be solely her choice, not influenced by investments or expectations. Because of this, she made a statement that immediately attracted notice when she later described the incident in an interview. We don't deserve